The confirmation that this temporary change, which will apply in England from the 11th of January, and actually has happened before, it happened last year, was in place from January to March, means that if you are experiencing symptoms, if you like, the traditional symptoms of COVID-19, now those would be a cough, loss of taste or smell, or a temperature, then you will need to isolate and you will still need to get a PCR test. But if you're taking a lateral flow test just in the normal course of your daily life and you happen to get a positive result, then you won't need to confirm that with a PCR anymore. That's the significant change. You will still need to isolate. That isolation period remains at 7 days with those tests on day 6 and 7 in order to ensure that you can leave isolation at that point as long as you are negative. But these changes, as you heard from Gillian Keegan there, come into place because the prevalence of COVID-19 at the moment across the country is so high that the chances of getting a false positive on a lateral flow test have reduced significantly. So the scientists and experts agree that at this point in time, it makes more sense to free up the capacity in the testing system, the PCR testing system, for those who have those significant symptoms and for everyone else with a lateral flow test just to isolate. Now, the really key point here is that people are still being asked to report those positive lateral flow tests to the government. Now that matters because the government needs to know how many people are testing positive. It also matters because they might want to sequence any changes, any different variants, and they also need people to still go through the track and trace process. So it doesn't mean that you can't register your result. You will still need to do that using that QR code on the top of the test, but it does mean that you don't need to send off for a PCR test anymore, making the system slightly less overburdened, because we know that there are many people trying to get those confirmatory PCR tests, going back to work, trying to confirm with employers that they will need to do so. So the system has become overstretched. It's been very difficult. It's also incredibly expensive. Now, there will be some exceptions to these changes for people. For example, if you're getting the £500 test and trace support payment, you will still need to do a PCR test to confirm that you can get that. If you're part of a surveillance programme, you may still be asked to get a PCR test regardless. And for around 1 million people in England who are at extra risk, they will be sent PCR test kits. There'll be no change there because they are in a different category. They may well have more risk from this disease than other people. But I think this change signifies the fact that Boris Johnson, who, remember, is going to give a statement to Parliament later on this afternoon, is trying to move the country to a position where we live with COVID-19 and where we try and free up some of that capacity, perhaps try and reduce some of the amount of money that's being spent on the testing system. Remember, though, this is only temporary, and we all know with COVID-19 things can change quite quickly. If there were any potential changes, they could reintroduce this need to get a PCR test, but for the moment, we don't know when it will end. Being introduced from the 11th of January in England, you won't need a confirmatory PCR if you test positive on a lateral flow.